Okay, let's talk about the macro story, because that's what you were saying. Macros are important. Look at policy. Would you be disappointed by the story around the way the government's putting out the whole macro plan at the moment? Just look at the state of the economy, for example. Are we being nimble enough? Regulatory issues, look at these.
I don't think so. I mean, our country is pretty good at being nimble and kind of, following through with policy on what needs to be done. There's always this kind of initial reticence and kind of the initial drama, but net, when it comes to delivery, these guys will, inevitably kind of get there. So I do not worry. I think, overall, in our usual way, the all's well that ends well, and I think the end will be there for all to see. So.
But even as we talk about being nimble, it takes me to the point that India loves to believe that it actually survived the crisis better than many of the other countries that had, deeper troughs to go through. Are we on an overdose of we've done it well, and therefore all's well that ends well?
No, to be honest, I think it's, one of the reasons why India prevailed through the crisis was, a lot of India's exposure is domestic. So they were less exposed to all the travails and the pains of the Western world where, the exposure was, I would say, kind of global. So in a kind of way, that focus on self, helped India, and effectively, is kind of the catalyst for, it's the engine room for global growth per se. So you could say, it was not, all's well that ends well, but it was not, I would say it's part luck, part design. So I wouldn't entirely kind of pat ourselves on our back for it.
How do you compare India and China and the attractiveness in the market today?
I think the two economies are at different phases of growth. I think China, without doubt, is far, far more advanced than we are. I mean, even things like infrastructure, etc. I mean, it's a showpiece of how to. But having said that, I am very bullish on the growth outlook for both nations, and I think globally we all are, or we are in deep trouble. So I would almost say, it's just a timing delay between the two, but without doubt, I think they're both accelerating towards a very, very kind of strong, outlook, and both countries will dominate the world stage, no doubt.
Growth, what kind of growth are you factoring in? 8% plus, convincing enough, or are you likely to see a little bit of a change on that front?
Yeah, the 8-9% is kind of what we think India, what we are solving for with regard to India. Absolutely, right. We are buying it. When you speak to most corporates, etc., their investment plans, their growth outlook for their own companies, pretty much tie in, and if not in most cases, outperform what India's growth plan is. So to me, the way I look at it is if India is an amalgamation of companies, and if each one of them is on a growth trajectory which is greater than that 9%, in a lot of cases double it, then it's just a matter of kind of, the India growth needs to follow the sum of parts per se. So I'm pretty bullish. I think 8-9% should be achievable.
What is it that you tell your clients when they come there and say, we want a piece of that India story? What is it that you actually pick up and say that, okay, this reflects it the best? Why don't you pick these sectors? What is it that you sort of take them with? You
mean like a stock pick?
No, broadly as a sector of interest.
As a sector, I think power, utilities, these are all kind of classic consumption stories. When we were looking at the energy sector, close to half the country still does not have access to power, and so these sectors are sectors where the supply-demand imbalance is, your demand is whatever you can supply. So effectively, you are looking at exposure to these sectors. The other big sector is infra and infrastructure. Fundamentally, there are massive projects being planned, roads, ports, you name it. And all of that requires, investment and all of that requires companies who are able to execute and deliver on these projects. So,
is there a risk associated with some of these sectors that you're bullish on? You said infrastructure, something we were talking about, execution risks. That reflects in some way that there could be a mismatch between expectations of returns and the actual returns.
The risk is there, but once again, the risk is on project execution. Once executed, if you have a toll road, the country is not kind of crying out for people to use the roads. Once you put the road in, the traffic is there for all to see. So a lot of the risk that you take with these companies, especially at this stage, is around execution and delivery and being able to meet deadlines and timetables.
I'm surprised you didn't mention telecom and retail, the hot consumption stories.
Telecom is an interesting space. I'm not an expert in it, but if you look at the tariff that, especially in the mobile telephony space, that, the tariff, just as a man on the street, it is pretty competitive and pretty aggressive in terms of, how fierce that entire sector is. So, it's a question of, there will be some that prevail and some that don't. But I would say it is a fiercely competitive sector. But I would say still in terms of infra, etc., there is a lot more scope to build and to grow.